that they might have had a different. It would have been obvious, perhaps even that there might be some pain involved, because how else do you explain why we can feel limbs that are severed? So our experiences are different today, but even I think as the story of my daughter shows, it's some of those instincts, some of those just basic psychological, like how does the world work, still exist from both the ancient times into today. And so that's one of the ways in which I think there's a diversity of beliefs, and people still hold on to those, even if the way we think about the world rationally doesn't always work. I want to maybe I'll go to another text. Share the screen again. Okay. All right. This is the very next part of the text. This is these texts, by the way, are from the Babylonian Talmud, so they're at least 1,500 years old. So Rav Chisda said, a person's soul mourns for him during all 7 days of mourning, as it is stated, and his soul mourns over him. And that's the end of the verse, that his body feels ache and his soul mourns over him. Oh. Anyway, like they're imagining not just that the person continues, but that the person would actually continue and feel, I think, a very reasonable thing. If you do continue to exist, then it might take you a couple days to be like, wait a minute, I really to get over the fact that you're no longer alive. And here we have Rav Chisda, a well-known rabbi from the Talmud, who just, that's how he approaches it. All right, I want to go to this. So now I'm going to tell you some stories. I have the text here so you can follow along, but I'm just going to tell the story. The story is of two rabbis, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yonatan. They're walking in the cemetery. And the rabbis had this idea that, you can't wear a talit, you can't say like, you can't say Shema, you can't say, do other mitzvot in a cemetery. They say, why? Because the people buried in the cemetery can't do it anymore. And that's considered to be rude. And so Rabbi Yonatan's walking through the cemetery, and he has his tzitzit, is the blue thread. Today on our talitot, you won't really see it, but some people have, even today now, a blue thread, and it's dragging on the ground over the graves. And Rabbi Chia says, lift it up, because the dead are going to say, look, tomorrow he's joining us, and now he's mocking us. And Rabbi Yonatan asked the main question: do the dead actually know what's going on? And Rabbi Chia says, gives an answer, and he brings a biblical proof, to say the dead won't. Rabbi Chia says, no, the dead do know. And he gives an alternate interpretation of that text. The reason I wanted this text is because the story continues, jumps ahead a generation. The sons of Rabbi Chia, they go out to the countryside, so they leave the center. They're not in yeshiva anymore. And because of that, they forget their learning. And one of them says, does our father know about our distress over this? I want to start, first of all, one of the common experiences that people have when people talk about death is the idea that, yeah, my father is looking over me. Or my mother is looking over me. And here they're asking that question. They're saying, well, is our father here looking? They want to know, is their father looking over them? And one of them says, no, he couldn't. And he gives a quote from Job that the fathers don't know about the distress of the sons. Hold on one second. I need to move you so I can keep reading. I want to say two things. Just first of all, in terms of the story, it shows the fact that they forgot their learning, because their father is the one who said the dead actually know what's happening, and they've already forgotten it. So, but they're also, though, I think, responding to a very basic idea that, is dad watching over us? Does he care? And they have a debate. how do they end it? And this, I think, is a really interesting middle position, which is that the dead actually do continue to exist, and they are aware, but they're not aware of us. Right. So the verse that said the whole discussion that the dead feel worms and things like, they're like, yeah, that's true, but that doesn't mean that they know what's happening with us. That's an interesting discussion because some people are certain the dead know, and others. Finally, this story. I want this just so you can see the story if you want to read it yourself. This is a bit of a longer story, and I can send it out to you if you want it. They want to say that the Talmud brings in another story to argue, well, in fact, not only do the dead know, they know, not only the dead know what's going on with them, they know what's going on with us too. And they tell a story of this. This is one of my favorite Talmudic stories, just because I find it just to be a funny story. But so I think I went back here. There was an incident involving a pious man who gave a dinar, which is a decent amount of money, to a poor person on the eve of Rosh Hashanah during a year of drought. And his wife rebuked him. Gave too much money. What are we going to do? It's drought. So he went and spent the night in a cemetery. I don't know how many people have ever, I know, so yeah, I've heard of sleeping on the couch. Sleeping in a cemetery is, but he goes, to get away, he sleeps in the cemetery. There he hears two spirits talking to each other. One said to the other, my friend, come let us wander the world and hear from behind the heavenly curtain what calamities are destined to come to the world. So there's no, they don't have, social media to look at. They don't have television. They don't. So how do you entertain yourself? You want to go find out, well, what's going on? So, and it's Rosh Hashanah, right? So God is the judge. God is deciding what's happening in the world. So let's, instead of going to services, let's go hear what's going to actually happen. So, sorry, the other replied, I cannot, because I am buried in a mat of reeds. But you go, and whatever you hear, come and tell me. So already you have something interesting, that there's this mix of the physical and the spiritual, because you have this deceased person, but because she's buried, she's wrapped in reeds and she can't get out. She's stuck there. So the first one goes, wanders and returns, and says, what did you hear from behind the curtain? And the second spirit replies, I heard that anyone who sows during the first rainy season will be struck by hail. Their crops will be struck by hail. The pious man went and sowed during the second rainy season instead, listens to their advice, and the crops of the entire world were struck, but his were not struck. So his investment of giving the one dinar gets paid back. He gets a bumper crop, and everyone else is struggling. We don't need to read the second one. It's basically a second version of the same event. The next Rosh Hashanah, he goes back. The same discussion happens between the spirits, and he learns something new. And again, he figures out, it's this time, it's the first rainy season he plants during, and he again makes lots of money. After this happens, his wife says to him, why is it that last year the crops of the entire world were struck, but yours were not? And now the crops of the entire world are blighted, but yours are not. He told her all that had happened. It was not long. And then once you start talking, and this is once you start talking, everything spreads, right? It was not long before a quarrel arose between the wife and the mother of one of the deceased young woman, the one who was wrapped in a mat. In anger, she says, come and I will show you your daughter who is buried in a mat of reeds. Meaning you actually, you didn't bury your daughter properly. You didn't give her the respect that she deserved. It came a matter of, you can imagine in a small community that there might be some competition in some way over whose memorial is more appropriate, whose memorial is better. In this case, she's saying the way you memorialized your child was so inappropriate, you buried her in a mat of reeds. The following year, the pious man again went and spent the night in the cemetery and heard the same two spirits conversing. One said to the other, my friend, come let us wander in the world and hear from behind the heavenly curtain what calamities are destined to come to the world. The other replied, leave me alone. Matters between you and me have already been revealed among the living. So I love those stories. I just find them to be like there are more of them. There's a whole list of, there's there's one where a rabbi has to go and find he leaves his money with an innkeeper, and the innkeeper dies, and so he has to find the money. So he goes to the cemetery and talks to her, and not only says where he hid the money, but also tells him there's another young woman who's going to be passing away tomorrow. Tell her to bring my brush and my comb. My mother-in-law knows where they are. Just this, and the sense that this innkeeper, and I think especially in that, if you look in Talmudic texts, innkeepers were often women, and the discussions of their looks actually do come up in other sources, which I guess makes sense if that's your business. You're going to be you're running an inn, and you're the hostess. That making sure that you look a certain way might have been important. It fits in with this idea that if you keep going through these stories, not only do the dead continue on, they also, I have one source I could have shown you where it says, what happens when you die to the righteous when they die? Well, they get given houses near God. And it's just this kind of, and the more righteous they were, the bigger their house will be. And there was this idea that you kind of continued living your life just the way you did. And it became a way of teaching, and it actually became a tool of talking about all types of moral lessons where you can project them onto the afterlife and have the discussions happen between the dead as opposed to the living. And that, I think, allows for more. I think a lot of people do that in stories. They talk about their personal problems by talking about other people. And I think talking about projecting it onto the dead is another way of doing that. But, all right. What do people, any thoughts on these stories or questions? Denise, do you have your hand up?
No.
Rabbi, where did these stories come from?
So they're from the Babylonian Talmud, which is a collection of rabbinic literature from where modern day Iraq would be, edited about 1400 years ago, I'd say. There are debates over exactly when, and it's the text that is probably the most studied of the traditional rabbinic works, even though we don't necessarily follow everything in it. I'll